and welcome to this Astranti pre-scene analysis video. My name is Jordan and I'll be guiding you through this document for the management case study exam for the November 2020 and February 2021 sitting. And in this pre-scene we are now looking at a business called Prybloxx. Now before we go any further, I feel an introduction is in order. My name is Jordan and I work on the content creation team at Astranti. Now part of my role is to prepare materials for the MCS exam. This will include our pre-scene analysis series of videos, the production of our industry analysis of the pre-scene company, and I'm also heavily involved in the writing of the mocks that we produce for the MCS exam. Besides the case study itself, I am also one of the CIMA tutors here at Astranti, where I produce a range of content from the objective test mocks through to the study text and learning videos. Now, how does this video series work? Well, we'll start by going through the pre-scene section by section, breaking it down as we go along. We will only cover a couple of pages in the pre-scene each video so that you can pace yourself through the document. First, we're going to be looking at the key points of the pre-scene analysis. Now, this will include the operations of the pre-scene company, so if to manufacture its manufacturing process, for example, how it serves its customers, who are its customers, and what its financial position and performance is, as well as its organizational structure, to name but a few of these key points that we're going to be looking at. Alongside this, we're going to be looking at providing a wider industry analysis and show you how this relates to our pre-scene company. And for the industry analysis more specifically, we have a separate video that covers the finer points of the wider industry in more detail. Now, it is important that in your exam you demonstrate your industry knowledge and awareness when answering your questions, as that is what the examiners are also looking for alongside your ability to answer the question. To aid our analysis, we'll also be using some business models that seem relevant. So, for example, we may use PESTLE, SWOT, or Porter's 5 Forces to give some generic analysis of the business. Now, perhaps the most important part of this video series is to raise the most likely exam issues from the pre-scene document. So this analysis is designed to refine your knowledge of the pre-scene company and the wider industry, but we also want to connect this information to the relevant topics that you have learned in your CIMA studies and these topics that you will obviously be examined on. And to supplement this, I may give some exam hints or tips that are based on past experience on how CIMA have assessed certain topics in the past. Once we've covered the pre-scene analysis, we'll move on to the strategic analysis. Now, in this video, we use something called the rational planning model. Now, don't worry if you haven't heard of it before. It is generally something that is introduced at the higher levels of the CIMA qualification. Nevertheless, it is a very useful tool for us to use when conducting a strategic analysis of our pre-scene company. Now, using the strategic analysis, we can attempt to figure out what the current position of the company is, where it plans to go, and how it intends to get there. So the purpose of this in the exam is so that you have a broader understanding of what the pre-scene company's strategic goals are, which will allow you to frame your answers in a way that makes strategic sense for the company. And lastly, we will round off this video series with a top 10 issues video. Now, this might seem self-explanatory, but it's basically me going through and picking out the top 10 issues that I think are relevant to this pre-scene company. And we do this because there's a lot of material to cover at this level of the qualification, so we hope this top 10 video will help direct your revision and narrow your focus on the theory that is most important for this pre-scene company. As for how this analysis specifically works, again, I'll be going through the pre-scene section by section, but I'll also be assuming there is no prior knowledge of the pre-scene. So we will be building up our knowledge of the pre-scene together, starting from 0, working all the way up to 100. Obviously, if you have already read the pre-scene, then you may need to be patient for the first couple videos as we build up our knowledge of the pre-scene company. And we recommend that you are active in your learning and that you take notes of the pre-scene alongside our analysis. So you could read the section of the pre-scene covered in the video prior to watching it so that you can compare your notes to ours. Now, this will mean that you may have some different points. Maybe you'll find issues that are not addressed in the video itself, but that is completely fine. That is the whole point of this process. The point is that together, we can try and identify as many points as possible and help substantiate your own analysis of the pre-scene. Then once we've finished our pre-scene analysis, as already mentioned, we will go through the full strategic analysis and the top 10 issues. Just to finish off then with some notes to consider on the pre-scene itself. For starters, the pre-scene is released by CIMA to give you context on the pre-scene company you are going to be examined on. So CIMA's aim is to test the content of the pre-scene in the exam. This means we can make some educated guesses about what may come up in the exam. Emphasis on the may, there's no guarantee. So the inclusion of particular items within the pre-scene could indicate that CIMA intends to actually test you on that particular bit of content in the exam, and I'll do my best to point out these to you as we go through the pre-scene. However, I will say this, and I urge that you take this to heart. Do not pre-write anything based on the pre-scene alone. This is because in the exam you will be given a range of scenarios that you will have to respond to specifically. These unseen scenarios will include information that is not in the pre-scene. So if you go into the exam with a pre-written answer based solely on the pre-scene, you are likely to end up writing answers that do not answer the question posed in the exam. And if you do not answer the question, you will not be rewarded for your efforts. Instead, you should use the content that we're providing here to give you a background on the various topics to make it easier for you to adapt and respond to the unseen issues more effectively. So as some final points, do use the pre-scene and make recommendations that are consistent with your analysis, but make sure you answer the question and make sure you address the unseen issues in the question directly and organically. With that out of the way then, what we're going to be doing in this video series is splitting the pre-scene into parts, and starting with video 1, we're going to be looking at your role in the business, the role that you'll have to play when you're doing your exam. And we're also going to look at the history of the plastic construction toys industry in this video before we actually move on to the other areas of the pre-scene analysis. So looking at page 2, what we've got is a small chunk of text, and this chunk of text will give us context for who Prybloxx are, what their business generally speaking is, where they're located, and most importantly, perhaps the most important part about this entire document is the last paragraph where it explains the role that you'll be playing in the company. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's start at the beginning. We're told that Prybloxx is a quoted company. What this tells us is that there's a possibility that in the exam you may be asked to consider some of the financing opportunities that Prybloxx can call upon if it needs to raise finance for, say, the purchase of an asset or maybe the acquisition of a business. And as a quoted company, you will have more access to various forms of equity finance. As a result, you may also be requested to understand the implications of raising finance in this way and what this might mean for the business. So you may have to consider, say, financial ratios like gearing and how this will affect the business's perception of risk. If we carry on then, we're told that besides being a quoted company, it is also a manufacturer, and as a manufacturer it creates a range of plastic bricks that are sold globally as toys and educational products. Well, since we're dealing with a manufacturer, we have to think about the supply chain and logistical complications that this come with. Of course, since we're dealing with a global manufacturer, we know that this is going to be a large business. So we can think of topics like economies of scale and how this may benefit the business in the long run. And so we're going to be moving towards the P2 end of things, looking at cost systems and how a business can manage its costs. So in your exam, you might be asked, say, well, for Prybloxx, what are the benefits and disadvantages of using, say, an activity-based costing system over an absorption costing system? And because of the global nature of our business, we're going to be dealing with a complex supply chain. And this could mean that maybe we need to ask the question of cost management. Are there perhaps better ways of managing our supply chain? Is there any restructuring that's needed? And if there is, what would be the most appropriate cost management method we could use to bring costs down and make the business overall more efficient and effective? Now, because we're dealing with a global business as well, we have to consider foreign exchange risks. So in F2, we have to consider IAS 21, the implications of foreign exchange. It might be that in the exam we're asked a question concerning the acquisition of a foreign entity. and we're asked to explain the implications that this will have on our group financial statements. We could also be asked to consider the risks of foreign exchange. As a global business, we're going to have to deal with things like imports and exports and the effects that currency fluctuations can have on our business in that regard. And because of this wide net that Prybloxx has cast across the world, it means that we have to consider the intricacies of a business ecosystem. The different players, so our suppliers, our customers, our competitors, how they all play a role in Prybloxx's ecosystem. And it could be that we're asked to consider the digital aspect of an ecosystem. Since Prybloxx is spread across the whole world, we need to consider digital channels for communication, how Prybloxx interacts with its customers overseas, and how this can augment the business. It might be that we're asked to consider or assess the introduction of a new form of digital strategy, a new digital management strategy that we intend to use to expand or develop our digital ecosystem. And then wrapping up this short little paragraph, we have, of course, IAS 38 intangible assets to think about. We're dealing with, of course, toys and educational products, right? Now, given the nature of these products, it means we have to think about intellectual properties, the brand of the business, and the trademarks of these toys. We all need to consider the research and development costs that go into developing a new toy line, new product ranges, perhaps even entirely new ideas that will result in completely new products for the business. So in your exam, you might be told that Prybloxx, we are introducing a new product to the lineup. And so you need to consider what kind of development and research costs have gone into that and whether some can be capitalized or not. What happens if a product line fails during the research phase? How do you account for that? And so this is why you need to understand IAS 38. You may also need to consider the licensing partnerships that Prybloxx set up between itself and, say, a media company that is looking to have its TV show characters turned into Prybloxx toys. Now, we're told that, with regards to the country, that Veranda has a developed economy with relatively high wage rates, and this means that citizens can afford a good standard of living. And this is where PESEL could be useful in this context, because what we're dealing with here are things that are outside of Prybloxx's control. The fact that Veranda's economy is well developed and its high wages, and how this impacts the business. Well, of course, because Veranda is a developed economy, you might be able to infer that the government is also quite strong on regulation, that the government is very stable. It means that you may have to consider the strength of the government in forming new political regulations that will affect the company. So in your exam, you might be asked to understand and explain the implications of a new government regulation that's going to affect the business, such as, say, bans on single-use plastics. With regards to high wage rates, you of course have to consider the wage of your workers. If you have your factory based in Veranda, what are the impacts of high wage rates on your costs? Do you have to ask yourself, maybe we should outsource factory production to a cheaper country? But then you have to also think about the consequences of that decision. And because we're a toy manufacturer, there's of course also the fact that toys are not really a necessity product, are they? They're more of a luxury product. Things that people would only spend money on if they have disposable income. And so, because we've got a good standard of living in Veranda, it means that the population you might expect is willing to spend money on toys for their children. If we look at high wage rates more specifically, this points us in the direction of management in E2. Because if workers have high wage rates, then you may have to consider different motivational models, because maybe workers aren't motivated by monetary gain, but instead fulfillment. We might be asked a question in the exam on the use of Hertzberg's two-factor theory in figuring out how to motivate staff. And because we're dealing with a country with a high amount of disposable income, we can of course think about the pricing strategies that are available to Prybloxx. Because the country has disposable income, you could think of things like, what is the demand? What is the price elasticity of the business? Maybe what is the maximum price you can set to gain the maximum profit? And in your exam, it could be that you're asked to explain which pricing strategy is most appropriate. Perhaps Prybloxx has to consider different pricing strategies depending on the country we're dealing with in the question. If we move on to the third paragraph then, we're given some information about Veranda. We're told that the currency is in the V dollar and that the Verandan company law requires companies to prepare their financial statements in accordance with International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS. Now, just the mere mention of IFRS opens up a ton of questions that we could be asked on. It could be that we're asked to consider IFRS 15 revenue. What is the impact of, say, a contract that Prybloxx has with another entity and whether it can recognize revenue from that contract, how it recognizes revenue. Perhaps we have to look at IFRS 16 leases and the impact of maybe leasing some machines or other equipment and how we would account for that in our financial statements, the implications of that accounting treatment. There are also things like ratio analysis. We have to understand how we would analyze an entity's financial statements, both our own and our competitors. We have to understand what these ratios tell us, how to compare them, and the limitations of them most importantly. So as for our last paragraph, we're dealing with what is perhaps the most important bit of this pre-scene, which is what you're going to be role-playing as in your exam. Now this bit is very important because if you do not answer the question in a way that fits your role that you've been given for this exam, you will not be marked highly for your answers. So you have to make sure you put yourself in the position of the person you're role-playing as. And in this case study, we are looking at role-playing as the financial manager at Prybloxx's head office. And we're told that our primary responsibilities are associated with management accounting and that we report to Alex McDonald, who is the senior financial manager, and they report directly to the finance director. Now, this can give us some sort of clue as to what we might expect to come up in the exam. For starters, we're told that our only responsibility is that we are associated with management accounting. We're not told we may have to conduct other research or we have other responsibilities. And furthermore, we report directly to the senior financial manager rather than the finance director. So in this case, we're dealing with topics that are more appropriate for management accounting as opposed to strategic thinking. What this means is that you're probably more likely going to be asked to explain the implications, the benefits and disadvantages of certain methods of management, certain costing systems, perhaps certain financial reporting standards. So if we look at the learning outcomes and core activities for the management case study, you can see that as a financial manager, we're one part removed from the finance director. And so because of what we've been told in the pre-scene, it might be that we're asked to implement senior management decisions. So that means we're going to be given tasks by our senior manager and we have to figure out a way of implementing them in the medium term. It might be that we're also asked to explain the accounting implications of a strategic decision rather than helping to make a strategic decision. And what we have here on the right to finish up is the various core activities and the spread of topics as well as their weighting in your MCS exam. So you can see all 5 core activities have equal weighting and that there's a large spread of topics. So in each core activity, you could be asked anything from P2 to E2 to F2, with C and D being a little bit more constrained, but overall, you're going to be dealing with the whole breadth of your management case study topics rather than a focus on one particular area. Although it should be noted that P2 does have dominance in this area as it does come up more often. It comes up in every single core activity compared to the other 2. Now, while I've got your attention at the end of this video, I'd like to make you aware of the other products that Astranti sell as part of the case study course. So the first of these is a series of study text and tuition videos, and these come in 2 flavors. You have our written study text if you prefer learning through reading, or you can watch our videos if you're more of a visual learner. Now to start with, we have an exam technique study series, which breaks down how to succeed at various case study levels. We'll be looking at exam technique, writing style, and planning that you need to nail to be successful in your case study exams. And to accompany this, we also have a revision series dedicated to the theory side of things. This is because at the case study level, there is a large amount of theory you need to be capable of using in your case study exam. So what we've done here is we've taken the key areas of the theory from the 3 case study levels and condensed them into a series of chapters to help focus your revision. Moving away from the more generic products and onto the products that are specific to the case study pre-scene, the first of these is the pre-scene analysis video series. First and foremost, this contains a series of videos where we break down the relevant pre-scene at the appropriate level of the qualification, page by page. And throughout this video, we bring out all the key points that could be relevant for you in your exam, looking at various topics and things you might need to consider when revising for the case study. And then to supplement the pre-scene analysis, we also have 2 videos. We have the strategic analysis where we give a broad overview of what kind of strategy the pre-scene company is using and where it might be going in the future. And then we also look at the top 10 issues that we think this pre-scene company might be subject to and something that you may need to take into consideration when revising for the case study. We then provide an industry analysis document and accompanying video. CIMA like to see you demonstrate wider industry knowledge in your exam, and this is what this industry analysis does, as it gives you the wider industry knowledge you need in order to fulfill this requirement. Essentially what it is, it's a large document that we've compiled on all the relevant industry information that we have gathered so that you don't have to do the revision yourself. And then to accompany this, we of course have a video that goes over this document to pick out some of the key points for you if you'd prefer that. We also produce a number of mock exams for every sitting. We write 5 mock exams for the first exam sitting, and then we add 2 more supplementary mocks for the second exam sitting. We design these mocks around the specific issues relevant to the pre-scene and make them as close to the real thing as you will see in the case study exam as possible. So these are a great way to practice your exam technique and test your knowledge of the pre-scene company under timed conditions. And then to add value to this product, we also offer a marking and feedback service. So we have a range of highly skilled finance professionals working as freelance staff for us, and it is these staff that provide the marking and feedback service. So this is a great service to use in conjunction with our mock exams, as it gives you a great idea of how you're progressing in the areas you need to work on for your case study exam. And then if you're in need of extra exam practice, we also provide a more generic question pack product. So obviously there are only so many questions you could write about on a specific pre-scene. So what this question pack is a series of generic questions on generic scenarios that we come up with at Astranti, whereby we look to test specific topics that come up regularly in the case study exam. So if there is a particular topic you are struggling with and we've only tested once in our mocks, and you'd like more practice on it, then these question packs will be a great product for you to turn to. The penultimate product on this list is a product for those of you who would like to get a full overriding picture in terms of your revision all at once, and these are our masterclasses. So these are our expert tutors who hold 2 masterclasses every exam sitting, and these essentially cover all key aspects that you're going to need to know for your relevant exams. So from particular theories to analyses of the pre-scene, all the way through to tips and tricks you can use in your exam. And finally, such is the confidence we have in the quality of our product that if you do purchase a full course from us and you unfortunately do not pass your exam using our product, then we will offer what we call a pass guarantee. So if you did not pass your exam after purchasing our full course, then you will receive the materials for the next exam sitting free of charge. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. I hope you find our products useful, and of course I would like to wish you the best of luck in your exam from everyone at Astranti.